And it says we're live. Christina, hello. Woo-hoo. First person to say hi in the room. How are you?
Hi, Christina.
So yeah, you might be the only one in here. It hasn't given me it usually says at the top how many people are watching, but it says 0 at the moment, which is clearly wrong because Christina is at least here. So I'm just going to say hello to anyone who's watching. Welcome to the September installment of the Literary Witches live chat. We are looking at the life and poetry of American poet, Victorian era poet. Oh, we've got some more have just jumped. It's just, I think it's a bit slow. I'm going to actually, let me turn the Wi-Fi off my phone. Oh, I have turned it off my phone. American poet Emily Dickinson. So we've got Elemental Cartomancy, Kristin Katsuye, Jen's Balanced Tarot, she's listening while she works, naughty, and Jamie Kelly, as well as Christina, who was the first one to say hi. So hi. So yeah, I guess has anyone here that's in the chat read any of the poems? Don't know if anyone has. Do you have the list of poems that we were looking at, or do you want me to read them out?
No, I've got them.
Awesome. We were looking. Hello, Lisa Amber. We were looking at 7 poems, and Kimberly Maya and Rona is here as well.
Hi. So the poems we were looking at were
Aquamarine,
Wild Night. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just waiting for you to read them. You said Wild Night. Sorry. No, it's okay.
So, Wild Night. I felt a funeral in my brain. I dwell in possibility. The moon is distant from the sea. There's a certain slant of light, and fame is a fickle food. And the last one is this world is not conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
Those
cool.
are the
Thank you for that, Becca. 7 that we were looking at. Well, Kristin said yes, read all but 1 because my book didn't have it for some reason. Wow, that is like the whole book of poetry. That's impressive. Christoph is here, Elle here, and Elemental Cartomancy says that they're a newbie here, so you're very welcome. Hello, lovely to have you.
Thank you. That's Chris.
For joining us.
Elemental Cartomancy. Yeah, it's Chris.
Okay. Hello, Chris. Welcome to my channel. So you said that you've come to a conclusion after the 3rd poet of the project, and what was your conclusion, Becca?
My conclusion is I'm not a poetry girl. I'm really not. I mean, and I think also the era that these were written in, put it this way, if there's a TV program on TV and it's about this era, it's the kind of TV program that my mum loves. You know, Pride and Prejudice, or Mr. Darcy coming out of the water without a shirt on, all that stuff. She goes into orbit over that sort of thing. I'm exactly you.
I love a period drama.
I like a period drama, but I prefer it if it's set in just say the 1400s or 1500s. Like Henry VIII stuff I could watch from here to eternity, but this era I really, really struggle with. Yeah, I'm not into poetry.
Laura Aquamarine 18 says that she's the same as well, and we've got some other people popped in as well that I spotted, Tarot Tales and Laurie Berry. So I just wanted to say hello before we sort of get into the meat of the discussion. So this is the thing, I am a poetry person. I like to read poetry, but I don't like all poetry, and that makes sense, right? Because poetry is a type of art. I don't like all art. I like films, but I don't like every film. So to me, poetry is it's subjective, right? It's not objective. And I originally, when I read the 7 poems, they're all very, very short, I did struggle a little bit, like we were saying, there's the dashes and the sort of, she has no central style. She sort of experimented a lot, and she was very unique for even her time. So we'll get into later where we'll talk about her life a bit more, and about how her work was published posthumously and stuff like that. But what I said to Becca is, before we went live, is I remember reading Emily Dickinson at school, having to read her at school, and actually really enjoyed her work. And I was thinking, what am I missing here? Why did 14, 15-year-old Kelly enjoy this work so much? What am I missing? And so what I did is I went and looked at study analyses, summaries and analyses that students would use, and felt like, I was like, I get it now. There was so much nuance and beauty in these poems that you read them again and again, and you're looking at what these people are saying about them, and you're like, oh my god, yeah. And then once I rereading them, I got a whole new thing out of them. I got so much more out of them, and some of them are so open to interpretation in so many different ways. They're really clever. One of them being that I felt a funeral in my brain, which I read several different analyses of and came to a different conclusion, which is really interesting, right? Because they're such short poems, you don't think that they could have so much nuance in them. But people, it's like tarot, right? A certain card will mean different things to different people depending on their lived experience and just what's going on in their lives right now, or the context of the question, right, or the spread position. So I think that's quite interesting. I'm just going to have a quick look at some of the comments before we look at the first poem. Meow meow meow. Let's see. I would actually be so interested in reading a book of Dickinson's letters, says Laura. Me too. I've actually put that on my reading list. The funeral in my brain sounded like a migraine headache, said to me, said Christina. I can imagine that. I've had migraines. I used to suffer with them terribly. I guess I could see that. Let's see. So, okay. So what was the first one on that list again? Was it I Felt a Funeral in My Brain? No, Wild Nights, Wild Nights. Oh, no. So yeah, Wild Nights.
A Funeral in My Brain is probably the longest one, actually.
Yeah, I think you're
Funeral
right.
in My Brain.
So Wild Nights. So do you want to read this one, or shall I read this one?
I don't mind. I can read this one if you desire. You can get the next one, which is a long one. Okay, so this is Wild Nights, Wild Nights by Emily Dickinson. Wild nights, where I with thee, wild night should be our luxury. Futile the winds to a heart in poet, dome with the compass, done with the chart. Rowing in Eden, the sea, might I but more tonight in thee. So it is very racy for the time, actually.
This is a super duper source, and I just said super duper in relation to fucking Emily Dickinson. Oh my god, she's spinning in her grave. It's a super saucy poem, and I really, really actually like this one. I didn't need to do too much scratching under the surface to get the meaning of this. But there are two readings of this. Again, there's that nuance, because it could be her speaking to her lover who is distant from her, right? Wild nights, were I with thee? So she's not with her love. But also some readings of it have suggested that she's talking about her relationship to God, which was a very interesting relationship for Emily, because she didn't attend church, and she would playfully call herself a pagan or a heathen, because her beliefs were not aligned necessarily with the church, which is quite interesting. But where she says wild nights should be our luxury, during her lifetime, luxury actually meant sexual pleasure. So when she says wild nights should be our luxury, wild nights has two connotations. Wild nights as in there's a storm raging outside, a storm raging inside, and our luxury pleasure,
because
which is really, really interesting.
Her life, she was privileged. That's what enabled her to stay living at home with in her father's house rather than getting married for like kind of monetary things, which most women of that time had to do. So she, her luxury in everyday life, but yeah, this would be the one luxury.
The luxury. So she's referring to luxury in the sense of code, our luxury, our sensual pleasures. And it's interesting because Higginson, who was a long-time friend and sort of correspondent with Emily, he was one of the, because he was involved in publishing, he was the one that worked with Mabel Lewis Todd, Austin, Emily's brother's mistress. He wrote to Mabel because they were the ones that put together a bunch of Emily's work and published them after her death. And Higginson, in a letter to Mabel Lewis Todd, says on wild nights, he says, one poem I dread a little to print, that wonderful wild nights, lest the malignant read into it more than the virgin recluse ever dreamed of putting there. Which is really interesting because he's obviously desexualizing Emily. He's put, first of all, he's put lest of the malignant. So he's calling anyone that would read anything sexual into this malignant, which is like, get off your high horse, mate. Second of all, he's saying that they're going to read into it more than that virgin recluse ever dreamed of putting it there. And I'm like, dude.
Yeah, I mean, that is a real reflection of that era, isn't it? A real reflection, because women weren't seen as the ones that received any pleasure from sexual encounters. That was all, the male point of view. So the idea that she was sexual in any way whatsoever would have been a real kind of no-no. When in fact, she was
a woman with passions and desires,
Yeah, just like any other woman.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, he's seeing her completely like desexualized. The middle stanza, which is futile the winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart, again can have like a couple of different readings, which is futile winds to a heart in port, done with the compass, done with the chart. She's either saying she's found what she needs, so she's done with the compass and she's done with being, she doesn't need to use the port because what she's found, she doesn't need anything else. But it could also be that she's stuck in port and can't go anywhere, so the winds can't move her away from the port. She's moored, right? The compass and the chart are no use to her. So I love that there's different meanings. It's really, really clever. And when she says rowing in Eden, she's talking about bliss, right? So it has those spiritual connotations, but it's also talking about when you just have that blissful feeling when you're with someone that you are in love or in lust with. And I love that last line, might I but more tonight in thee. I mean,
see, my brain in where at the time we live in, when she says done with the compass, done with the chart, to me that could mean also that she's just done with it, given up with it, that
in what sense?
well, in that she wasn't navigating anymore in that direction towards the wild nights, towards her passion, her luxury.
But I feel like she's saying, when she says in the next line, she's saying rowing in Eden are the sea, she's continuing that passion.
Yeah, I mean, she could be, but also that last bit for me was kind of almost that was like a wistful ending, even though she'd said that, you know, she's done with the compass and the chart, so she's not navigating anymore. But then she says, "Mine eye but more tonight in thee." It was kind of, to me, that was kind of like a little amusing at the end, that last kind of wistful feeling about that would be the ultimate outcome if she'd have managed to steer in the direction that she'd wanted to.
The thing with this, I think, is because this poem feels like it's about the pleasure in the longing, like it's that, you know, the anticipation, and she's clearly not, she's saying might I but more tonight in thee, because she's not with her love, and they're kept apart by this, like when she's saying wild nights, it can also mean that she's looking out on a storm, but it also sounds like she's being tossed about on the waves. It's really like there's so much nuance in such a short poem. I actually think it's really fascinating, actually, really, really clever. Just gonna have a quick look through the Janet Hansen is here. Hello. Kristen says that's smart to look up study guides for works. Yeah, I tried to do it for poems, but I couldn't find too much on some of. Well, I didn't do it for. I did it a little bit for Firuza, and I did a little bit. I didn't do any for What's the Chops, Sylvia Plath, because I found her poet. Because we were reading a book, and I read a couple of her poems, but it wasn't what we were studying, so I didn't do it for that. And then for Alejandra Pizarnik, I couldn't really find much, because a lot of the stuff written is in Spanish or in French, so it's struggling. Could be about unrequited love, Rona, definitely. Maybe they didn't find luxury in anything.
And I think also because she's actually studied in the classroom a lot of the time, there is going to be a lot more.
Yeah, there's a lot of. Exactly, there's loads to mine from, so I found that really, really helpful. I was like, oh, why didn't I just think of this before? So shall we go on to the next one? What was the next one?
I felt a funeral in my brain.
Okay, this is the longest one. Now, interestingly, I couldn't find the book. I have this version, and it's actually the 3 collections that were published by Higginson and Todd in 1891, 92, and 94. And these are the edited versions. So these don't have her dashes, they don't have her capitalizations, and actually they've edited the 5th stanza out of this poem. And I think, again, editing her, we'll talk about this a bit later, about why they edited her and how they sort of reduced her to the woman that we think of today, and how that's actually an incorrect perception of her. But yeah, it's I think it's because it got quite dark, and so they cut the 5th stanza, but I've got it written down here, so I will read the whole poem. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading till it seemed that sense was breaking through. And when they all were seated, a service lamb kept beating till I thought my mind was going numb. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my soul with those same boots of lead. Again, then space began to toll. As all the heavens were a bell, and being but an ear, and I and silence, some strange race, wrecked solitary here. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down, and hit a world at every plunge, and finished knowing then. So there's a lot to unpack there, and it sounds really confusing, but there are several main takeaways from this poem. The first reading of it is that it's about someone losing their grip on reason and reality and losing their mind. The second reading of it is that she's actually coming back to reason, and becoming more sensible and staid in her older age. And then a third reading of it is she's literally talking about a funeral. And I actually really go with this reading of it, that she, when you think about it, she's talking about, she starts to, so she's saying she feels a funeral in her brain, so she can't see anything, but she can hear what's going on around her. So she hears all these mourners going to and fro, and then she knows that she can tell when they're seated, and then she hears them lift the box. So like she can hear them lifting the box that she's in, right? It's a coffin, and she can hear those boots. So they're carrying her out to where she's going to be buried. And then she just, everything goes quiet. She's alone. And then she's saying that a plank in reason broke. So suddenly she's realizing where she is, and she's in a coffin. This is her funeral. So it's realizing, she's imagining what life is like after death and imagining her own funeral. And then she says that, and hit a world at every plunge. So she's being lowered into the ground. And she says, and finished knowing then, which could be she stopped knowing because she ceased to exist, or it could be she finally knows something. She moves on to where she's meant to be. She moves towards the light, her next part of her existence. You know, it's so new, again, so nuanced. It's really, really clever. Do you have any thoughts about one?
Well, I did, because the first sentence, I don't know whether that just coloured the rest of the poem for me or not. But to me, that first sentence kind of spoke to me as a little bit of the kind of breakdown in her brain, if that makes sense. Kind of the almost like the death of it, being conscious of becoming older and thinking of our own demise. And it's kind of like when you think to yourself, gosh, I've lived more of my life than I've got left to live, and that suddenly dawns on you, you actually start to then think about death more. And so that kind of coloured that for me. And she was like, the next one was, and mourners to and fro kept treading till it seemed the sense was breaking through. So I mean, I find the poem so confusing, because to me in this one it sounds like she flips from one sense of thinking to another. So just when you think you understand what the poem's about, you get to the next line and the next line, and then you think to yourself, well, maybe it isn't about that at all. And I think that's why each poem that she's ever written, there's like 2 or 3 interpretations, maybe, or more, of what she actually meant.
But they can all be right. That's the point, right? Because maybe she meant all of those things. Because I've definitely written poetry in my time where I've done wordplay, and the poem has more than one meaning. And then, like I said, it's like tarot, right? You're taking from it what you need, and it's objective. So it's like art, right? You're looking at painting, you're looking at a Degas, or you're looking at a Bosch or a Goya, and different people are going to get different things out of the same painting, or pick out different things, or think that it means different things, especially when you start looking at abstract, surrealist, impressionist, things that are like not like super realistic paintings. You're getting at the meaning of that piece of artwork becomes nebulous and is subjective, which is what I think is really interesting about her poems. Like, you know, it can also mean that she is losing her grip on reality, because, you know, she's saying that she has this beating in her head and her mind's going numb, and she's talking about these boots of lead and the belt, you know, everything's ringing, and she just can't hear herself think, you know, she can't hear reason. But it does, for me, it feels, for my reading of it, is like it's almost like a thought experiment on wondering what it would be like to wake up in a coffin on your own funeral. During your own funeral, which I kind of like that.
Because when she talks about the plank, and then the plank in Reason broke, they put actual planks across the hole and rest the coffin on there, don't they? And then they move them out of the way, and then, you know, she next as she drops down and down. But so it could be any of those things that she's actually talking about. And like I said, from that first line, seemed to me like she was expressing the deterioration of her mind, because that was her first thought to put on of the rest of the poem. That was the first line she put on the paper, and very often the first line that goes down is kind of a theme of what comes next.
Definitely. But yeah, I love that it's so open to interpretation, and that we both got kind of like landed on different things for that, which is really cool. So what's our third poem?
Our third poem is The Moon is a Distant Sea.
The moon is distant from the sea.
The moon is not the moon is a distant sea.
Do you want to do this one?
I will. Just let me get it up, because I've got all these on on an online one. Did you buy the physical book?
Yeah, but it's the Victorian edited version, not the sort of academic restored version, which I was trying to find, but I wasn't sure which was which, and nothing was clear. So I did also look up the proper the reinstated versions online, so that I got the full meaning of.
Mine are all from the Poetry Foundation website.
Yeah, they'll be they'll be the proper ones, as Emily intended them. Just go get my
so, okay, the moon is distant from the sea. The moon is distant from the sea, and yet with amber hands she leads him, docile as a boy, along appointed sands. He never misses a degree, obedience to her eye. He comes just so far toward the town, just so far, goes away. Oh, Signor Vine, I can't even bloody read these things. Oh, Signor Vine, amber hand, and mine a distant sea, obedient to the last command, thine eye impose on me.
This one was definitely this was probably my least favorite out of all of them. It was just, I just didn't care for it. What about you?
Well, that's really weird, isn't it? Because I was exactly the opposite about this.
Oh my God.
I was exactly the opposite. This was one I could actually get to grips with, because I really liked I mean, I love the moon, and I love the sea, and I love illustrations of that. So the amber hands, I could see as like the setting, as the setting sun goes down and the moon becomes more visible. And like she was talking about the two, as if those hands, the amber hands, leads him as a boy along appointed sands. So to me, that I could visualize that in my brain. You know, it's like an observer of sitting on the beach and watching the sun go down and then watching the moon come up. And when she says he never misses a degree, so she's talking about, like, you know, it's the same every time. Sunrise, sunset, moonrise, moonset, and he never misses a degree. Obedient to her eye, he comes just so far toward the town, just so far goes away. So that's, I could visualize that first part. The last part, I kind of got lost a bit then.
Yeah.
So what was it about this that you didn't, that was your least favorite? Why was this your least favorite?
I mean, it was fine. I didn't hate it. It was just, out of all of them, this captured me the least. You know, it's fine. It's just, out of all the other ones that I sort of read into, I found this the least interesting, I think. I mean, the reading of it is that it's about lovers. You know, there's this woman, and actually Rona's posted, the moon is a woman, the man is the sea. So this is in the first stanza. So you've got the moon is distant. She says she leads him docile as a boy, and I do like that, docile, because Janet says she doesn't like the idea of docile, but when you think about having a lover, whether that is a man or a woman or a non-binary, whatever, and they are willing to please you in any way, you know, sometimes you know, that docile isn't necessarily negative. It can be a very sort of loving sort of thing. And yes, obedient to her eye. This is talking about lovers that have a distance between them, which is interesting for Emily, because obviously a lot of her relationships were long distance, i.e. via writing to each other, letters, right? But she gender swaps in the final stanza. So the Signor, thine amber hand, he becomes the moon, thine the distant sea. So they're swapping, and she's saying, obedient to the least command, thy eyes oppose on me. So she's almost saying there's this invisible force of attraction, and maybe the speaker, i.e. Emily, is saying that her life might be different if she wasn't so influenced by this man from afar, or this person from afar, which is quite interesting, which is why I think she gender swaps it at the end, because there's also an element of control being imposed on her by these emotions, this feeling, this relationship.
I think that the problem is with me when I'm reading poetry, it doesn't matter what the person intends that poem to be about. The first thing that captures in my mind it takes me on a completely different tangent then. So as far as it being about lovers, when I first read this, it never even crossed my mind, because it was almost like she was talking about a relationship, yes, but it was, from my point of view, it was the watching, you know, like the cycles of watching the moon and the sun, and this kind of, that it never misses, you know, it's like a constant. But then that's just the way my brain works. It's very difficult.
And that's also entirely valid. That's also entirely valid. I think the thing to remember with poetry is it's all just interpretation, right? Again, it's subjective, but also we have to think like prose and poetry. The difference between prose, when you're reading a book, generally as a rule, you are being described something to describe the situation, to describe what people are wearing, what they look like, what they sound like, where they are, what the situation is, the conversations that they're having. When you get to poetry, it's all about metaphors and similes, and it's abstract, so it's all about alluding, especially during Emily's lifetime. She couldn't write plainly about this stuff and just like put it out there. She's so that stuff is couched in hidden meaning, and then that's the joy of like picking that apart and pulling that meaning out. And yeah, Janet was saying like, what was it, that she appreciates how we all see something different, and that's the cool thing, right? Again, it's art. Poetry is art. And I love that you, as a lover of the moon, saw that, when you're have you ever sat on a beach at night and looked up at the moon and you can hear the waves? It's magic.
That's what
yeah, like I can totally see that, definitely. Like, but then the poem also means that it contains all of it, and I think that's beautiful. Like, it can mean all those things, just like, again, like a tarot card
to me
mean
that is
so many things.
Yeah,
go on.
Because that's a relationship, and it was mentioned about it never misses a degree. It was almost like, because her brain is always in such a muddle, or not a muddle, but it's so kind of constrained by the time that she lives in terms of her feelings, how she would like to express when she talks about love, which she can't, that she was looking at those things that they never change. They are a constant, they don't miss a degree. Every single day they're a constant. But yeah,
That's
the other thing is,
yeah, go on.
I was going to say the other thing is that I it's very difficult to see anything that she writes in terms of male and female, because that really wasn't how she picked, was it?
Well, this is the thing. There's an argument to be said that she was gay, but there's also an argument that she could have been bisexual, and without her placing those labels directly on herself, it's conjecture. Let's put it this way: she probably very much likely wasn't straight. But there's arguments among academics whether her relationship with Judge at the end of towards the end of both their lives was sexual or not after his wife died, or romantic at least, because they write a lot of letters. But there was definitely something going on with her sister-in-law for sure. But we're going to get to that after the poem. Yeah. So
sorry,
I know we're clipping. No, it's fine. I know we're clipping through these because we've done 3 and we've got another 4. So this might be a longer one. What's the next one?
There's a certain slant of light.
This one is this is an interesting one. This is quite a melancholy one. So there's a certain slant of light on winter afternoons that oppresses like the weight of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us, we can find no scar, but internal difference where the meanings are. None may teach it anything, 'tis the seal, despair, an imperial affliction sent us of the air. When it comes, the landscape listens, shadows hold their breath. When it goes, 'tis like the distance on the look of death. So this one is really, really melancholy, and it's like a meditation on the nature of despair and the inevitability of death, because she's saying, there's this certain slant of light, that cold wintry light that spills through into the room on a winter afternoon, and there's a sadness about it, right? It's not that warm golden glow of summer, is it? And it's this fleeting cold light, a bit like sort of fleeting life. And she's saying that this light oppresses her like cathedral tunes that are meant to sort of be quite spiritual, meant to be spiritual and like strong and overbearing almost. But she says heavenly hurt it gives us. She's saying this hurt that we're given is given to us by God. It's this bittersweet. We can't, life is bittersweet because, you know, you can find no scar, she's saying, but it's the difference is inside. There's no outward appearance of this hurt. And she says, you know, there's inner confusion about the meaning of life. I find it so interesting. And then she says, none may teach it anything. So she's saying, you know, there's nothing to be done about it. You're going to die. You can't get out of that, which is really cool.
Yeah.
And she's saying that, like, when it comes, the landscape listens. So she's saying, like, the world can only wait for, like, God's will to be done. And, you know, it's something that's shared by everyone, but ultimately it's a feeling experienced by everyone, but individually. And so because you can't share that with anyone, you can only feel it in yourself. It makes it an isolating feeling. So it's really like, yes, as Christina says, she's got seasonal affective disorder, but it's more than that. It's more than just talking about the winter. It's actually talking about this. She's using that slant of light as a jumping point, but she's really talking about this, like, helplessness and sort of inevitability of, like, we all die, which is really, it's melancholy, but done in such a beautiful way. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I like how she in a lot of her posts she's written to or she uses the nature around her, what she sees of it, because she doesn't come out of her room very often, but she sees of it. She appears an awful lot in a poem. You know, talking about light and the landscape, the moon, the sun. So that's about the only thing that what can I say? What can I say? I don't. This one didn't have any thoughts on it. You don't have to. Well, this one didn't capture me, not as much as the other one did, and maybe that is because I feel the mood in this one more so than I did with the others, if that makes sense. You know, words stand out for me when I read things, as if I was taking notes when I was at college. So there's things like despair that stand out to me, shadows stand out to me, death, oppresses. So those are the words that stand out to me when I read it. And so when I feel oppression in a poem, I feel something in me as well. That's why I tend not to sort of read a lot of psychological type stuff. And to me, there's an awful lot of talking about her. Well, it is talking about, she's unpacking her brain basically onto paper, and putting it into poetic form. And it's kind of a release for her. And yeah, it's not easy when you see something written down that somebody else has spewed out of their brain, even if it is in poetry, when it's about despair. And this isn't a fictional character, it's a real person.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it's definitely a sad one, but it's so eloquent as well. Which it's almost gothic in its beauty, almost. Should we jump on to the next one? It's already 9:45, so we need to. Should we pick one more rather than all of them? Because we've done 1, 2, 3. We've done 4, and we've got 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Yeah, so, we've done 4, and we've got 3 more. I think pick one more.
So it's either going to what? Let's just go with. Should we go with fame is a fickle food? Because that was next on the list.
I would actually, do you mind if we do I Dwell in Possibility? Because I actually think there's more meat on that bone, as it were.
Oh, we skipped that one, didn't we?
Oh, is that on there?
Yeah.
Is it
that
higher
was
up the
second.
list? Well,
That
let's do that because it was second on the list. And actually, it's a really positive one. And I think it's nice to end on a positive one, right? Because Fame is a Fickle Food is a little sad, like a sort of darker poem as well. Do you
Okay.
want to read this one?
Yeah, I can read this one. I dwell in possibility, a fairer house than prose, more numerous of windows, superior for doors, of chambers as the cedars, impregnable of eye, and for an everlasting roof, the cambrids of the sky, of visitors the fairest, for occupation this, the spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. You're right, this was a more upbeat one. I liked this one.
I like this one. I really like this one. And I love that she's writing a poem about poetry, essentially, because she's saying, I dwell in possibility, i.e. I'm a poet. I dwell in possibility. I have so much. There is so much there. She says, a fairer house than prose. Poetry is more beautiful than plain prose, more numerous of windows and superior of doors. So she's saying there's more light in this house. There are more entryways in and out of this house. And then it moves beyond the house, and she's saying of chambers as the cedars, as in the forest. So she's moving outside. It's not just a house, it's a garden, it's a forest. And she's saying that this forest is impregnable of eye. It goes on and on and on. And then she's talking about this everlasting roof, and it's the sky. Literally the sky is the limit with her poetry, because it's just whatever she can imagine. And that's just so, it's so open and beautiful and liberating. This wasn't in my book either, Laura. I had to write this one down. There were a couple that weren't in my book.
That's interesting. I wonder why they weren't actually in the book.
Because they were published at a later date, because they split between the two different families, and so they were published in separate books at different times. So we've got, this is the Luna's Todd.
I was thinking stuff. Okay, because you can,
and this would have been.
I was going to get. Yeah,
you can get
the book that works. It had got it all. It had got the whole kind of lot in. Well, not all. Yeah. There's something like nearly 1,018. Yeah, there's a lot of them.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
But I really liked that this is a part of nature. And she's saying, like, of visitors the fairest. So the visitors would be the people that are reading her poetry. So she's saying they're the fairest people, they're reading her poetry. And she's saying that for occupation, this occupation that I have, I'm spreading wide my narrow hands to gather paradise. What she's saying, what an occupation to have, what a way to spend my time. It's really sort of affirming and beautiful.
It's strange when you think that, particularly, I mean, I think she was told quite a bit that she wasn't a real poet, because poets have their work published. And I think her brother at certain times told her that she was just dreaming, and that she wasn't an actual poet because nothing was published.
Yeah, that's really, it's just like, what a git. There's juxtaposed with her living inside her room. The imagination is wider than her physical existence. Exactly, Janet. Her imagination is wild and free and can roam wherever she wishes, right? That's the power of the imagination. That's why when you practice magic, most magicians, sorcerers, witches will say one of the most important things you can use and hone as a magician or a sorceress or witch is the art of meditation and trance work and sort of honing your mind and your imagination, your mind's eye. That is one of the most important things that you can use. If not, I would say is the most important. People's mileage may vary depending on how you practice, but that for me is key. Rona says, I just saw your frog on your hairband. Robert, it's my little prince.
Oh, I hadn't noticed that either.
The sneaky little, that's why I put the green flowers so you can sort of
I haven't noticed that.
But yeah, so it's interesting because the view of Emily Dickinson is this woman that hid herself away in her room, writing furiously, refusing to see people, never had a husband, looked after her mother, was very dour, was very sad. She never wanted to be published. She wasn't published in her lifetime. She was too scared of being published. And actually what has since been discovered, because a load of her letters were found or bequeathed, they've been looked through, they've been studied, it's been discovered that actually Emily was actually actively trying to get her work published. So that's that view of her that we have is incorrect. And Mabel Loomis Todd, who was the mistress of Emily's brother, she went through all of Emily's correspondence and actively scratched out Susan Gilman, Susie, her sister-in-law, her brother's wife, scratched out all mention of her in all the letters, but scientific analysis of the letters have shown that the name is Susie. And this is like this was a massive revelation. This was only like 20-30 years ago, and it's only just starting to sort of be talked about and realized, and because academia can be moved so slowly sometimes, and for it to filter down to the rest of us, right? But she these letters, her and Susie were having a thing, these, and actually, again, I will read this part of her letter to Susie, which was just before Susie was going to come back from Baltimore after teaching for about 9 or 10 months. Now, imagine that this was written by a woman to her fiance or her husband. So I'm going to admit it. Will you indeed come home next Saturday and be my own again and kiss me as you used to? I hope for you so much, and I feel so eager for you, feel that I cannot wait, feel that now I must have you, that the expectation once more to see your face again makes me feel hot and feverish, and my heart beats so fast. That is just, the letter continues, and it's just as racy. Now, if that was written to a man, you'd be like, oh boy, she hot for that guy, right? This is a letter written to Susie a week before she returned back from being away for 6 months teaching mathematics. And there was 300 letters, over 300 letters, more letters than she wrote to any single person, and they literally lived next door to each other.
And it must have been really hard when she eventually married her brother. Must have been really difficult. It wasn't going to happen, was it?
People are saying, some academics say that she, because she enchanted Austen as well, and Austen was very taken by her. Apparently, by all accounts, she was a very interesting and exciting woman, this Susie. So she marries Austen, probably he's her beard, right? So she gets to spend as much time as she likes with Emily, because she spent loads of time with Emily. People make out like Emily was stuck inside her room and she never saw anyone. She was just super selective about who she saw. It wasn't she just didn't see anyone. She just had a real small coterie of people. And there was that quote I read in her bio video where she talks about a woman selecting her society, and then she closes the door because she's like, that's my circle, I don't need anyone else. And so Austen had Mabel Loomis Todd, his mistress, and that might be because he wasn't getting what he wanted from Susie, but that might be because Susie wasn't really actually interested in Austen. Susie's interest lied elsewhere, right?
Exactly. But I mean, things that you know, a lot of people tend to kind of concentrate on that, but she was also a botanist.
She was, yes. She was a very accomplished botanist and gardener.
And what I would really love to see, she put together a herbarium with like hundreds of pressed plants into this book. Yet she grew rare plants in her parents' greenhouse. So you can actually see that book, which they've still got, which is housed at Harvard University. She was also a great baker as well.
She was really, she loved baking. And in her lifetime, she wasn't known as a poet because she put together 40 folios of poetry containing almost 800 poems and hid them away, which weren't found until after her death by Lavinia, her younger sister. And she was more known for her gardening in her lifetime, and she was known for putting posies of flowers together, little bunches of flowers together to gift to people. She'd always gift them with a note of poetry and of prose or of prose. But yeah, she was known as like for gardening and baking in her lifetime, not her poetry. And obviously now she's known for her poetry. I think she would she would probably be pleased to be known for her poetry, because she was Emily was a botanist, Christina, and she studied botany. Yeah, she made the herbarium, which is
she was at female seminary as well.
She was only there for about 9 or 10 months before she came home. But there's no real agreement to why she came back. No one can really work out whether it was health or whether it was her dad wanted her back or she was homesick, or she didn't like the strict religiousness, because she wasn't a classically religious person by any stretch. So,
and it's also interesting that one picture that we've got, the picture that is mostly seen of her, that was actually taken when she was at seminary. That was about 1848, but they retouched it.
She was 18. Yeah, she was 18. She was very young in that picture.
They gave her a blush and curls.
It's fun, isn't it? Janet says she must have felt driven to write poetry since she didn't seem to share them at all. They were just for her. No, she wrote poetry for the people that she wrote letters to. She wrote poetry for guests. Some of her poetry was published. Only about 2 or 3 were published in her lifetime, and they were heavily edited because her style for the time was very outre, was very out there. And now that they've discovered her letters and people have gone through them, they found that she was actively wanting to publish her work. So she wasn't necessarily hoarding them away. She was just getting them all in order, because she asked Lavinia, her younger sister, on her death that she burn her correspondence. And I think that's because it would have given away her sexuality, not so much.
And that, I think that when you've got something to feel like you've got to have hidden, like she did, particularly at that time, although it still happens today, people hiding stuff like that. Your one fear, and I have it, I have that fear that, my God, what if I got knocked over tomorrow? My parents would come into my home and sort through all my stuff. And I think it was last year, I kind of thought, right, okay, I can't have this ticking over in my brain. So I got a few things, some photographs and stuff like that. I actually burnt them because I was just so overwhelmed.
What did you burn?
Some photographs that I
really?
got. Yeah, and the negatives. I burnt the negatives as well.
Why?
I went on. Well, because they were of a time, you know, and I didn't, you know, they didn't mean anything to me anymore. So the thought of somebody like either one of my parents coming in and having to deal with that, not that they were awful or anything like that, but you know, I just, for my own kind of peace of mind, I wanted to sort of get rid of them. So I burnt them.
Wow.
That was
but if they didn't
choice.
mean anything, I'm going to say, if they mean anything to you anymore anyway, then it's no harm, no foul, right? So
yeah, and that's, you know, that is because I don't actually need a physical photograph anymore. So you know, all those memories of that particular time are here, and nobody wants their parents to know every single thing, detail about, you know, their romantic connections.
I guess maybe I see. I've held on to old love letters and saucy poetry I've written. I've held on to all of it, and it does sometimes cross my mind. I'm like, if you know, me and Simon both carked it in a car crash or something, our respective parents would have to come, and they'd have to deal with his like massive collection of record CDs, his musical equipment, all that stuff. My family would have to contend with all my books and my clothes, I think. But yeah, like I've got stuff that I actually, the idea of my family going through it makes me laugh. Like I've kept all sorts of stuff, but I remember I knew I'd be fine because when I first moved in with Simon 10 years ago, almost 10 years ago, I remember I had some stuff, and there was one thing that was particularly difficult to hide. There was no way of getting around it. Basically, it was a set of leg irons. I had a backpack, and I just stuck the leg irons into the backpack and zipped it so that it sort of closed, and then I couldn't, you know, they were sticking out my backpack. So I walked out of the house with them, and I thought, just in the van, the removal van, and my mum came up behind me and she went, "Oh no, your leg irons are falling out your bag," because the weight of the leg irons has pulled the zip open, and they were sort of, you know, had been sticking out, and she sort of zipped it back up. She went, "There you go." There was a riding crop in there, you know, and I just thought, she's got me pegged, no pun intended.
It was interesting when my nana died. My mum sorted through all her stuff. I was only 15 at the time, but she came across a box of letters that my love letters that my granddad had written to her. She didn't know what they were. She just opened one to look, and she started to read it, and she closed it, and she didn't read anymore because she said those were private moments that were only meant for each other, and she didn't want to intrude on that. And I really got that. I really understood that. And so there were a few things like that my mum actually burned because they were a private moment in time between mum and dad. They weren't meant for her or anybody else. So I got that. I understood that. So
it's interesting, isn't it? Because it's like, what is the sort of ethical stance on that as well, isn't it? Like, it's giving them their privacy, but also I don't know if you've seen, I don't know how long ago it was now, but there were some letters found between two soldiers during World War II, I believe it is, and it was clearly a romantic relationship, and they're writing to each other, but some of it is coded, and they're talking about the stuff that they would like to do but they can't, and there's so much longing in there. But it's this history of queer love and romance during World War II, and it's just so heartbreaking. And if those letters hadn't been found, we wouldn't have this little piece of like gay history. But also that was in violation maybe of their privacy. But I think those letters were bequeathed after one of them died willingly. I can't remember the story. I have to see if I can find it, but it was really beautiful letters and heartbreaking. But yeah, That was really interesting that your mum sort of was like, no, I'm not going to read this. Also, no one wants to read about their parents getting it on. It's like,
well,
no one
no,
wants to know that.
No, but it wasn't. I mean, because the language that they use, it, you know, I mean, when they got together in that time, back in the sort of like 1930s, late 1920s, early 1930s, language, you know, there wasn't anything. They wrote differently. So,
oh yeah, it doesn't have to be coarse to be sensual, though, does it?
no, exactly. But it was, you know, that was. She knew in an instant it wasn't meant for her eyes. It wasn't meant for anybody else's eyes. So, and
really
I figured, because I mean my nana died very, very suddenly, and I had this feeling that had things been different and she would have had more time. She's only in her early 70s, 70, 73, which is young now, you know. I think she would have probably done that herself.
Yeah.
Because of precisely that, but she didn't get chance to sort of do that. So that's probably why I've got this in my brain about private things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that I wouldn't want anybody else to see.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's really interesting. Laura says there are LGBT archives that try to collect these things, but it's hard. Of course, people burn things when them being found could get them in a lot of trouble during their life. Exactly. So I think we should, because we've got a bit off topic now, should we go through the cards? Did you pull out some cards that you felt were relatable to Ms. Dickinson?
I did. It's let me get them out. I artistically put my box up there today because I thought it would look nice.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I need the cards, which ones did you get? Once I get myself sorted out.
Well, there's the white dress, because everyone talks about the woman in the white dress, but actually that's a bit of a misnomer, because people talk about her wearing white dresses, but apparently by accounts she didn't just always wear white, so that's a bit of a misnomer, that one. House, because she spent a lot of time at the homestead. Moon, because the moon is distant from the sea, and it made me think of that. And skulls, again, because girl obsessed with death, right? bit of a goth, bit gothy. Love it.
Yeah, I mean, I got all the same except for you, but for some reason and I don't know why, I suppose because she talked about the nature and everything so much, and her interest in it.
I nearly pulled that
one as well. All the others were identical to yours.
That's so funny, and I nearly did pull that one, and I didn't, because it was wildflowers, not cultivated flowers, so I put it back. But I get what you mean, because you think about posies and flowers with her for sure.
Well, yeah, and the reason why I picked that is because she grew a lot of rare plants from seed. Some of them were you know, wild plants that hadn't been, you know, seen around around countryside or whatever for a long time. So anyway, that was the only one that was different.
Christina, I'm going to go with a yes, probably, on that one. Okay, so we have a bit of a different thing this time round, because usually at the end of these live chats, Becca and I, we take it in turns each month to shuffle the deck, the Literary Witches deck, and pick a card. But if you were in last month's live chat, then you will all know that me and Becca have we've pulled a bit of we're doing something a bit different, because I was going to say death and love, Janet, actually we used to take the words out of my mouth. We've decided we wanted a spooky bitch for October, for spooky season, and we're going with Mary Shelley, the OG goth. Yes.
Oh yeah.
We are reading Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, for October, and I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Dun, dun,
and
dun.
there are so many. There's a brilliant adaptation of Frankenstein. I think it's still, a movie
Mm-hmm.
still available on Netflix. I think
Or is
maybe.
it called Mary Shelley?
Yes.
With what's
oh
the
no,
chops?
maybe that's about her. That's about her life.
Maisie Williams.
Yeah. But anyway,
Maisie
there's
Williams.
a bunch of different Frankenstein movies that you can get your teeth into. Modern ones.
Yep. Watch the films. Listen to the audiobook, read the book. Oh my goodness, very, very exciting. And yeah, because right, it's a book that's had adaptations and iterations and has been riffed off and is considered, it's gothic horror, but it's also the first science fiction novel. She fucking invented science fiction and she was goth as shit. Like, she's so cool. Oh my God, Laura says, I saw a Frankenstein play with Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller screened at our theatre. It was good. Yeah, I've only seen a little bit of it. Like, I've seen clips of it, but I've heard good things about it. And I've seen the pictures of them as each role as well. It's really interesting. Maybe I can see if I can check that out as well. And I like both of those actors. So yeah, I am looking forward to reading that. I'm looking forward to doing some more research about Mary Shelley. I know some stuff about her, but I'm looking forward to the deep dive. And also, shall we say, Becca, I don't know how you feel, but maybe for our Halloween episode, which will be, I think, on Friday the 30th of October, so a day before Halloween. Shall we dress up for Halloween?
Hell yeah. Oh yeah.
Any excuse, right? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
I'm like,
Halloween last year I had Simon.
I know you had everyone round.
Elle, all that stuff. So yeah, I've got my gothic hat, which will look, I shall wear that. Definitely.
Yeah, exciting. Yes, Mary Wollstonecraft was Mary Shelley's mum. I mean, she had quite a lineage and quite an interesting coterie of friends as well. And I love how she was like, "Fuck Byron, I'm gonna write like something better." Fuck these guys, holed up in a bloody house in Switzerland with these dudes. Anyway, it is 12 minutes past 10. It's quite a late one. I know we skipped on a couple of the poems, but it was getting long, as the youth say. Or do they even say that anymore? But thank you, Becca, for enduring more poetry for the third time.
You're welcome.
Hopefully you will enjoy have you read Frankenstein before?
I've not actually read the book from cover to cover, no, but I know the story really well.
Notes, right?
I know what? Sorry?
We all know the Cliff's Notes of it. We all know that we've seen the films, right?
We have, but I will listen to the audiobook because books generally have extra detail, and Hollywood and TV can skip around some of the greatness of the writing. I think Dad always says the book was better. So does my sister. So I'll go along with that.
Elle says bear long fam in it, right? That's London speak, bear long fam. So yeah, thank you to everyone that joined in the live chat and for reading along, and for enduring poetry, for those of you who are not massively into poetry. And so yeah, join us next month for spooky season and a Halloween special of the Literary Witches Project. Everyone take care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Bye.
End broad.